You're listening to The Great and Secret Knowledge. I'm Jeff.
I'm Lindsay, and we are dealing with the conclusion, the final chapters today of Piranesi.
Oh my God. The all but the last bit. Oh, I should say, we said at the end of last episode that we were just doing Ketterley, and we had to pull an audible after that. So, listener, if you for some reason were expecting that we wouldn't do Wave, go ahead and read it because we're about to do it.
Stop right now, read Wave, come back.
Yeah. How did you find this section?
Well, I think most of the sort of revelations in this chapter are things we've already like intuited by this time, right? But it was still interesting to see it in his own words, and see him coming to the house. And I liked the description of when it was raining outside and when he opens the door to the house, it smells somehow more strongly of rain, like there's rain from inside the house, and then immediately you're going like, no, don't go to the house. He's gonna open the portal to the other. He's already got it open. That's why it smells like rain.
Oh
But
God.
I did think it was well written in the way that like we're in his perspective as he's like interviewing him and taking notes and kind of sort of feeling superior about him being like, oh yeah, no, I'll show you the ritual, do whatever. And then when he realizes that like the candle, there's a mark on the floor because he's doing this ritual often enough that there's like a light spot on the floor where the candle goes.
I have to say, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No. That was the end of the thought.
That thing with the candle, I have already read this, or audiobook read it, and then I did that again, and then also read the chapters as I was preparing quotes and things. Every single time he whips out that candle, I'm like, oh shit. Like, yeah, I'm getting the
way
chills.
She builds the tension in that part is incredible because you can totally know what's happening and it's still like, no. Even just the way he notes that like the candle doesn't match the rest of the decor of the house and stuff. And then when there's the spot on the floor from the candle and he's like, he's doing this ritual all the time.
Yeah, the buildup of wax around the shape. Oh man. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm right there with you. I found it spooky and scary. Later on, like after the whole wave thing happens, I found it got a bit more, I don't know, just the facts, ma'am, kind of. Not in a rushing way, but like there was less sort of poetic language. We'll see as I go through the quotes, but I thought that was interesting. But just as soon as I was starting to notice that, that's when Raphael like shows up and is all nice and supportive and like respectful, and you're like, oh, and now I'm weeping.
No, I mean, Raphael, man, she does an incredible job of writing her in this way that conveys so much with so little, and that she just seems like such a remarkable person, and you're like, yeah, no, I want to... This is totally the kind of person who would come into another dimension to try and save somebody. And also, I want to hang out with her, please.
Hell yeah. I was sort of fan casting her in my head.
Yeah, who did you come up with?
This doesn't make any sense because I don't think she's Italian, but Rashida Jones is always high on my list. Ever since seeing her in Silo, she is incredible. Like her pathos and her her just ability to emote in all the right ways you need.
Yeah,
for
no,
the story.
and her warmth, she can convey like a lot of.
Yeah, I think that's what led me in that direction. I don't think she acts anymore. I think she's just a director, but Roxann Dawson from Star Trek Voyager.
Yeah.
She has that warmth, especially if you've seen that episode where she split into two between Klingon and human, and she plays human. It was, Anyway, those are my two ideas.
And the ability to have the kind of calm that Raphael seems to have. Like, those people definitely have that as well. Like,
Yeah. I think a lot of characters just come into a scene, and especially cops, they're very like businesslike, and she's a little different, as we'll find as I go through the chapter here. So the first chapter is called Valentine Ketterley. So he got to the house and he hears an accompaniment of Berlioz. And so my question on my notes is, are you familiar with Berlioz?
I am not.
Saying that right?
No, I can't say that I know any of, like, I might have been able to come up with that was a composer, but like I would not have been able to recognize any of their pieces. So
the guy's name is Hector Berlioz, and I'll show you his picture here. Okay.
Strong composer vibes. Yeah.
He's got that kick-ass Beethoven sweet back
hair.
Is it a bob? I don't know what you call that. Oh, I know. The Moriarty. It's that kind of vibe. But he wrote Symphonie Fantastique and Grande Messe de something Requiem. And I listened to it, and it was beautiful. It had a real, in some sections, a real bombast, a zest for life. But also, like, he talks about here, the soundtrack of Catastrophe, like some big drums and power, which seems like a Ketterley thing to do.
Yeah.
So Ketterley's between 50 and 60, tall and slender, handsome. So Matthew Rose Sorensen has always been interested in the way people look and dress. Like even in his house garb or whatever. His persona,
is house
identity,
self, like identity.
Self, yeah.
Yeah, no, he's always noticed and described what people are wearing and what that reflects about their personality. And we definitely see him doing it here when he first meets Ketterley. So
the only thing I can see with Ketterley in terms of casting, especially with this description, is if you've ever seen classic Doctor Who, Third Doctor, John Pertwee, his nemesis was a guy called the Master.
Yes.
First appearance of the Master was in... Oh, shit. What was that episode? It had androids. It was a rubber factory. Anyway, the guy who played him is... his name's not coming to me. Delgado. Robert Delgado. And is it Robert? I'm just going to look up. Master Delgado. Anyway, he has the goatee. He's handsome. He's Roger Delgado. This is his face here.
Yeah.
And he is very evil and very charming. So that was the vibe.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see like a Mads Mikkelsen too, although he doesn't have the sort of Mediterranean coloring that's described in Ketterley. But I could see the.
But he played being able to play Lecter,
yeah.
Lawrence Arne-Sayles is Lecter.
No,
Ketterley is more of a low-level stooge.
Well, yeah, I mean, but Ketterley, look, Mads Mikkelsen is a great actor, and he could play either of those people well. He can capture different kinds of villainous vibes very easily. But I just think the sort of... They talk about, and we get into it more in some of these chapters, the kind of, like, profane vibes of Arne-Sayles. And I think the sort of precise manicured nature of Ketterley would like fit Mads Mikkelsen, even if Arne-Sayles is like the bigger bad in this instance, you know?
Oh my God. I'm trying to think of the best cult leader actors. Gosh.
I was very surprised. Now, he's too young for either of these people, but how good. Have you seen Bad Times at the El Royale?
I was just thinking Hemsworth. He really hams it up in that role. But I love that
in
fucking
a way that
movie.
I could see like Arne-Sayles vibes, right? Because there has to be something charismatic about somebody to get you to listen to them. And that kind of unhinged but still charming that he does in Bad Times at the El Royale would, I think, be really good. Although obviously like too young for Arne-Sayles.
I mean, we're picturing them with like white hair and a beard or whatever. But I recently watched Jesus Christ Superstar.
The original 70s one?
Yeah, the gentleman who played Jesus, I feel like had the charisma and I don't know, willowiness, but none of the evil. Obviously, he was playing Jesus.
Right, but that doesn't mean the actor wouldn't be capable of playing a villainous role.
Oh man, I also got a little bit of Anthony Hopkins in Westworld, like just somebody who has all the power and authority. Even if they're not currently on top, like they could get there if they felt like it.
Yeah, so we're just saying all the Hannibal Lecter actors.
Oh, that's right. The original. Yes.
Everybody who's played Lecter could play.
Oh, God. Arne-Sayles. This chapter is not about Lawrence Arne-Sayles.
It's not. It's about Ketterley.
So, yeah, we get to our quote that you mentioned earlier. Inside the house, there was a smell of rain, clouds, and air, a smell of limitless space, a smell of the sea.
All smells that I am fond of, only ominous in this context because we know it's the house. Like,
but, I didn't write down the next quote, which made no sense at all in a Victorian terraced house in Battersea.
Yeah. So that the incongruity makes it creepy, but otherwise I love the smell of rain. I love the smell of fog, and I love the smell of the sea. I was into petrichor before the internet thought petrichor was cool. I'm just saying.
Oh man, on a hot rainy day.
Yes.
Right when it hits. Ooh. Yeah, I was in Washington, D.C. once on a family trip, and we're coming out of the Washington Monument, and like the rain starts, and it's those tiny little, wimpy things. We're from Seattle area, so we're like,
from rain.
Like, my mom and dad had lived in the South before, so they were like, take cover. And like we get to a building and then there's thunder. Anyway, the smell, I remember the smell being tremendous. So yeah, the next line, which made no sense at all in a Victorian terraced house in Battersea. And for somebody that's reading the book for the first time, that's like the key entering the lock and like clicking over and everything comes into place. So he turns down the volume. Ketterley turns down the volume, but it's still playing as the scene plays out.
Mm-hmm.
So at first I thought he was just describing what Berlioz sounds like, but then I'm like, oh, of course, the soundtrack of Catastrophe is the entire scene, the entire moment, the worst moment in Matthew's life, as far as we know.
As far as we know. I mean, maybe the moment when he's in the house and he realizes that Ketterley is intending to leave him there, and then Ketterley starts laughing, like...
I mean, I was putting it all together.
Right, as one moment.
Yes, that is probably the most scary jump scare moment. So let's see. We learned Ketterley stopped academia 15 years earlier. Quote, academia was never very welcoming to me. I had the wrong sort of ideas and the wrong sort of friends.
That's what happens when you join a cult.
Have you ever known somebody that was in a cult or ran a cult?
I mean, I've known people who got into like MLL, like, and those are basically a cult. And there's a reason why there's so many of them that are offshoots of like, or take such root in like Mormon communities and stuff, because they're basically structuring on existing belief systems, like exploiting kind of. So yeah, but that's about as much of a cult as I've ever known anybody in. How about you?
Yeah, my previous podcast, Everything is Awesome, I interviewed and became like besties with a lady named Erica Knapp, and her parents brought them into a cult when she was young, and then it was a horror show, and they eventually got out when she was like 18, and the cult continued for a while. Then I interviewed another lady, and like I've met a few people. I think my podcast network president was starting to act like one, and then I quit. But yeah, if you get to know that type of mind, it can be seductive. You know, I feel like, okay, I'm going to sound like a right-wing Christian here for a second, but the way I was raised, and even to some extent, Quakerism would probably agree with this, or at least some of us, that evil accretes and sort of becomes attractive to the people that do it because it's habit forming. It's like a drug. And so Ketterley's like, I picture him kind of smirking as he says, I had the wrong sort of ideas and the wrong sort of friends. Like he's reveling in his like villain origins.
I mean, I don't know. I could see that, but also the tone of like, there's a bitter irony when you understand that you were right and the organizations and structures that are built up thing fight you on like something you know to be, you know, because like they were correct. Like they got pushed out of academia because they were like playing with people's lives and doing it, but also just because they were asserting something that the establishment systems could not accept, but they know is real. They've been there.
I'm having all sorts of conflicting thoughts. I'm not just fading. Like, oh God. It's like, which sentence starts first? My first thought was, no, Ketterley, you bastard. You chose this life. Academia, of course academia kicked you out because you have no rigor, no stick-to-itiveness, no discipline, no like work ethic.
Right. He definitely does want
You
to.
can't just say, I know a thing.
Yeah. Anybody who was truly committed to knowledge and the scientific method or anything would have gone about finding this discovery and stuff very differently, right? Like one of the things that makes science science as opposed to anything else is that you create repeatable experiments, right? That's anybody anywhere using the same conditions as you can recreate your result. That's when you get to call something science, right? And they don't want to do any of that, right? Like they...
Yeah, like I want to find a reasonable allegory to our world, but really what it gets me more is like all those Star Trek mad scientists that are like, no, I want to do this faster. I want to break all the rules, like, you know. And so that's what I get here. Like, academia was not going to help me cast spells and
right,
like go
academia
to another
has
dimension.
Standards of before you can call something fact, before you can even call something a theory. It has to meet requirements, and you have to be willing to put in the work. And if you find something so unknowable that it doesn't fit any of the existing structures, then you have to figure out ways to quantify it. And none of these people had any interest in doing that, you know.
Man. Yeah, I guess it is an old story of like students dropping out and finding a guru and like, I don't know, getting into all sorts of weird ideas. Because it's not necessarily bad to buck authority. Like, I don't want to sound like the academia apologist.
You did make a new discovery. You want to pursue that, and people can get very locked into patterns of thinking. And once things become like established fact in academia or whatever, it can be very hard to introduce anything that's contrary to that. But these are also people who wanted a weird mix of like mysticism, science, personal power, you know.
Yes. We haven't got much about their acolytes, really just Arne-Sayles and Ketterley.
Mm-hmm.
I guess because the other cultists either disappeared or don't want to talk to the media.
Or are dead in the house, we think that.
Right,
I mean, because I think like
that's
Sylvia
why I said disappeared.
and stuff was approaching it from a very mysticism poetic angle, even though she like was a mathematician and stuff too. Like I think she was approaching
Was she the one whose dad was a poet?
Yeah, and she's the one who filmed the videos in the one video that's in the house.
That's right.
Or film as well as like the short. So I think she was approaching it from more of like a mystical sort of perspective and stuff like that. But yeah, none of them approach this in a way that like we want to share this knowledge and bring it into the general consciousness. This was all different. I want power. I want to understand the universe. I want the magic of the ancients. Like,
yeah, okay. I don't know if this is the right moment to go on this long tangent about colonialist ways of pursuing knowledge, but that's in my mind that, you know, because not every cultist is different. Every cult is different. But I wonder if there's some of that work better, like wanting to be part of the in-group that has the power is seductive to some.
Sure.
And also wanting to be led by a charismatic leader. Like I got no time for any of that, but a lot of people want it.
And like you said, the only people that we've had any firsthand accounts of are Arne-Sayles and Ketterley. So we have no idea what the motivations or the desires or the aspirations of any of the other people who were pursuing this. And they could have been far more general, like knowledge exploration based or really wanting to try and understand and approach. But the two main people we've heard from, Arne-Sayles and Ketterley, are very extractive, right? Like which does have a very colonial vibe, right? They don't appreciate, they don't want to understand, they don't respect, they just want to get out of it what they can.
I like that word extractive. It's like not just exploitative of people, but extracting the minerals, in this case, of truth, but instead of uranium or whatever.
Right, but it is the same philosophy of like going to a new continent and instead of trying to understand it or know it, just trying to take whatever you can get out of it of value.
Oh man. I keep imagining this as a series, like, because I don't think you could do this justice in a movie. But getting to know these other little side characters a little bit, like I can't remember their names, but the various goons of Arne-Sayles. It could be fun. Let's see. Next, Matthew thinks that maybe Arne-Sayles won't talk to him because he's ashamed. And that's when, quote, Ketterley gave a short, sharp, humorless laugh. Hardly. Lawrence has no shame. He's just perverse. If someone says white, he'll say black. If you say you want to see him, then he won't want to see you. That's just the way he is. Oh, man. Have you ever met anyone like that?
Yeah, like I've definitely met people who are sort of contrary by nature, that they just, you know, won't accept anything or want to argue with everything just because.
God, it's so tiring.
It's very exhausting.
I mean, we had a president for 4 years.
Well, and I don't know. I mean, because there's a difference between being contrary or like, and just being like a selfish narcissist. Like, that's different, because there is a thing about the perversity of wanting to strike a contrary position regardless of what the original position is, right? Like, when you're talking about Trump, that's just somebody who wants what he wants. Nobody else is really real to him. But if you gave him what he wanted, he wouldn't fight you on it, because he just wants what he wants. But that is different than the kind of person who has to strike an oppositional stance because he cannot bring himself into agreement with anybody else. So even if he previously held the position that you're asserting, he will now argue against it.
I'm thinking of Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny, and Bugs
I mean,
Bunny's
yeah,
like,
that's certainly
duck
a
hunting
vibe.
season. No, it's bunny season. Rabbit season? Doesn't matter.
Rabbit season.
Yeah. So perverse, yeah, that's really interesting that it's different from demanding or obtuse. It's like
Or even
I'm fucking
selfish
with the universe. Yeah.
It's like they just have to be oppositional to anybody, regardless of what, whether that was even previously their position or not.
There is actually a personality disorder.
Oppositional. Yeah, personality disorder.
I think I knew somebody that, like, it was an online thing, so I don't know if this were true. I'm not going to diagnose their kid from another state, but every time they mentioned their son, it was like, wow. Just cannot be pleased or satisfied in any way ever. Ugh, sounds exhausting. My mom was not that flavor of narcissist, but or whatever. Next page, we learn about Matthew's journals. He's a very good record keeper. Ketterley's like, you use physical pen and paper? And he's like, yeah, this paper works. He's got his system down. It's good for tracking information. When he says,
I definitely.
Oh, go ahead.
Identify with that. I'm a writer who all my first drafts are still pen and paper. I put them into a computer for editing because it's much easier to move stuff around and edit, but my first drafts are always pen and paper.
That's pretty cool. I have no discipline with my journals. Whatever one is to hand and has free paper, I'm writing in it. None of them are indexed. I've got. I'm
not a good journaler. Like, every time I start writing a journal, it turns into fiction.
That's awesome. Like, most of them are podcast notes, but yeah, when I write, I usually go straight to the notes app.
Yeah, I mean, I had a Harriet the Spy phase when I was a kid, where I was writing a spy journal in that style. But most of the times in my life when I've tried to earnestly keep a journal, I hit a boring day and my brain just wants to write something more interesting than what actually happened. And so they all become fiction at some point.
That's great. Did I ever ask you if you read, is it Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain? Or is it The Natural Way to Draw? Shit. One of those two books, the lady talks about the concept of morning pages, where you get up, write for 15 minutes or what have you.
Yeah.
I used to do that every day, and that would spark a lot of stuff.
Yeah, those kind of morning pages, writing sprints where you're trying to write for a set period of time without analyzing anything. Like, I can do that. But it's keeping like accurate records. Like, as somebody who studied anthropology, the amount, like, journals are so important to reconstructing historical time periods and stuff. And you gotta love people like Abigail Adams, who took like meticulous journals, right? Like, she not only talked about like what they did in a day, but like what they had for dinner, like how you had, like, just so useful to historians, right? And me, I will get 4 days in and I'm like, no. Like, this is boring. I just got to do fiction. And part of it is probably because I'm an anthropologist. I think about future people reading them, right? So part of me that makes me want to take like accurate notes of stuff that seems mundane to me, that seems apparent now that we might not know about in the future. But that means that I am always partially writing for an audience, right? Which is sort of bad for journaling in general. Because, like,
Oh my God.
even if that audience is historians 300 years from now.
Talk about a left field tangent. I had somebody I was very much in love with, ended up getting married to this person. Anyway, before that happened, they read my journal and got all up in my business, and it was like a real violation. Anyway, from that day forward, I have basically, I'm just now thinking about it again after a while. Thinking about posterity, like who's going to read these things? What are they going to think of this fucked up section? You know, should I rip that out? Because I had to like think about what she would...
Somebody reading them, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a weird shift, but I think it's important for fiction because the idea is for people to read it eventually one day.
I mean, I don't think that's the idea for most people. I think the idea is to like put your thoughts down and organize.
Oh no, I meant for writing fiction. But
oh yeah, no, for writing fiction, the idea is definitely that somebody will read it someday, hopefully. But I can't get away from that even when I'm writing journals because I studied anthropology and I'm always thinking about the future historians that might find my...
Today I had a croque monsieur, and here's some Doctor Who fan fiction. Or whatever. I don't know what you write. Let's see. We get Matthew's opinion of Arne-Sayles. Let's see. I explained that I was chiefly interested in transgressive ideas and the people who formulate them and how they are received by the various disciplines, blah, blah, blah. He's the transgressive thinker par excellence. He convinced a group of highly intelligent people that there were other worlds and he could take them there. He was gay when it was still illegal. He kidnapped a man, and to this day, no one knows why. So his opinion of him is low? Maybe?
It is not favorable, but I don't know that I would call it low.
I mean, he is a journalist, right?
He's a journalist, and his focus is on unconventional thinkers, right? Outsider kind of perspectives. So there's part of him that respects, or is at least fascinated by people who have, you know, the strength of their convictions, you know, the lack of fear of societal pressure or blessings. But again, this is like weird because he puts in there like he was gay before it was legal. And then right after that, like he kidnapped somebody for no reason, as if those are equivalent things, right?
Yeah, we're back to that thing.
About like, it almost sounds lauding in a way of being like he had the courage to be gay before it was legal or culturally acceptable. But then you throw in he kidnapped someone for unknown, you know, for no known reason. It's like, let's maybe not equate those things.
So I don't want to impugn Susanna Clarke. I don't know her
I don't know her either.
I don't know her politics or anything. But it's giving me Aleister Crowley vibes. Aleister Crowley was her depiction of Arne-Sayles.
Okay, yes.
That he was bisexual and like openly like dismissive of the law. Like he did whatever he wanted.
Yeah, I mean he started a sex magic cult. Like
he was a real piece of shit in many ways.
Do what thou will shall be the whole of the law was his cult's motto.
Order of the Golden Dawn and so on. And so I get some of that, like almost like it's a trope. And it's like she's paying homage to this older thing. That's the only thing I can think of that isn't just, come on, lady. read a book or whatever, like this is probably not the greatest depiction in 2015.
Well, I mean, it is the thing when people hear gay people say the phrase like "be gay, do crime" or whatever, and they were like, but I mean, that is a thing that exists in the queer community because it, until very recently, was a crime to be gay, and so to be gay in and of itself was to violate norms, right? But again, and we already had the whole conversation about the Hays Code and everything and the queer coding of villains in our culture, but it has like defaulted to queerness and sinister sort of disregard for norms or people or anything being interrelated. And I'm like, yeah, kidnapping somebody and being gay are not on the same level of.
Okay. I'm going to do a retro rewrite on Piranesi, one of the greatest books of all time. Make Matthew gay and make it clear and plain in both his journals and as Piranesi.
So you have a counterpoint of queer representation that is not a sinister cult leader.
And not that there can only be 2 gay characters in this book.
Right, of course.
We have several people referenced. More of them could be. But yeah, Arne-Sayles is our one representation of somebody that dared to buck convention and be gay out, openly when it was illegal.
Because it's not even just that he is gay, right? Like, it's that they reference him being gay in the same context as other, like, reprehensible acts that he's done, right? It's not just that he's gay and he's evil. They keep equating his queerness with his sort of selfish, destructive behavior.
Yeah.
Because, like, queer people are people like anybody else. They have a capacity to be bad. But, like, this is keep referencing his queerness in the context of, not just he is queer and also a bad guy, but, like, as part of his bad guyness.
Man. Okay. Well, we've spoken on that quite a bit. It'll probably come up again before we're done with this.
At length. Sorry.
No, it's important. I keep thinking about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and there's really nobody. Well, there is the queer-coded court guy that's always up to something, up to no good. Maybe it's just a thing Susanna's got to work on.
I mean, like we talked about before, we all have tropes buried in our brains, right?
Yes.
We all have the stories that we watched or read or listened to growing up have sort of implanted in us that we aren't even conscious of,
Yeah, there's a Doctor Who classic tale, The Talons of Weng Chiang, and it's still great to this day. However, the main bad guy is a white actor portraying a Chinese American gentleman who is super evil and has a Chinese demon in a box. Like, it's got all these tropes that harken back to, I don't know, Victorian, fucked up things that were happening back then. Basically minstrel shows.
Well, the Orientalism, where it was the both the exoticizing and the fear of Asian cultures.
Right. So, like, Susanna's not doing that, thank goodness, but she's doing this. Yeah. So he says the word conjuring, and Ketterley is not amused. Of course I object to the fucking word, he said irritably. You're suggesting that Lawrence was some sort of stage magician, and we were all his wide-eyed dupes. It wasn't like that at all. He liked you to argue with him. He liked you to put the rationalist point of view. And I thought, it's an interesting cult where it's okay to challenge the leader. That's not something we see depicted often.
No, that's true. Usually control is very central to a cult's operation, right? They do a bunch of sleep deprivation and love bombing and all kinds of things to put your brain into a malleable state. And, like,
He did make Sylvia cut contact with her family, which is a
Yes,
common
which
thing.
is, a coercive control thing to do. Making sure that you have no support systems or, close ties outside of the group.
I guess part of the thing I'm struggling with is Ketterley is not necessarily a reliable source of information.
Definitely not. But also anything we've heard from Arne-Sayles is not that he would be intimidated by, like, that he would enjoy discussions if he felt confident that he could come out victorious in that conversation, right? He liked to have the opportunity to, as he talks about here, that like he would talk you around on, he would let you state something and then use logic traps to sort of oratorially defeat you, even if what he was saying was actually bullshit. But he was just very good at manipulating even your own arguments into proving his point or whatever. So
sorry, that was I had a memory sound. The destroying you verbally through logic thing is something smart abusers can do. And it's super confusing for those of us who are also smart, because we're like, that's bad logic. That doesn't make any sense. I didn't do that. I can point to several examples, but you're flooding me with all this bullshit that I don't have time to like center and like focus on the really fucked up thing that you're doing, which is all of this shit. Oh, and also Ketterley likes this shit. Arne-Sayles is his type of dude for the most part.
Well, they're both they both want to be the dominant person in the room, right? Which is where a lot of their conflict comes from. They both want all the respect and admiration and power, and they couldn't have that in the same room at the same time, right? They were always going to be butting heads about that. And Ketterley, definitely, I believe Arne-Sayles in the sense that Ketterley is only like biting other people's ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he is still the person who wants to be considered the most eminent in the room, right? And Arne-Sayles and Ketterley couldn't be that at the same time in the same room, which is part of the reason why they were always at loggerheads. So,
oh man, it's really frustrating when these folks are espousing wisdom, because if you know their game, if you know what they're up to, because then it becomes hard to impress upon other people that in and amongst that stuff, they're really like being shitty, and there's no empathy there. Because the great leaders look to their people for support, but also understanding. They learn from their people. They mentor them. Like, Arne-Sayles isn't doing any of that shit.
No.
As far as we know. So, Sylvia D'Agostino, she was devoted to Lawrence. He told her to break ties with her parents, and she did. Quote, there was absolutely no advantage to him in cutting her off from her family. It didn't benefit him in the slightest. He did it because he could. He did it to cause anguish for her and her parents. He did it because he was cruel. And I found this really interesting because as if Ketterley isn't cruel, like he's judging him for doing this thing, but Ketterley...
Sure, but Ketterley is also like justifying everything to himself and not, which I'm sure Arne-Sayles was doing too. Like some of it might have just been, but I'm sure in his head he had a whole argument about why it was necessary to cut Sylvia off from her family, right? For the sake of the project or whatever. Like she was working on things more important than, and Ketterley just isn't projecting the same thing that he projects for himself onto other people, right? So
I was thinking of the pragmatism piece where he doesn't want to forget stuff, so he uses Piranesi to do his labor.
Right, like most other people outside Observer would see what he does with Piranesi as being as cruel as anything that Arne-Sayles did to Sylvia. But from his own perspective, he's like, no, well, this is important information. It needs to be known. I'm too valuable to be lost in there, right? Like, I can't forget who I am or what I'm looking for, or the great and secret knowledge will never be discovered. So I need to do this. Like, this is a necessary evil, if he would even think about it in, like, the terms of being a necessary evil instead of just necessary. But he's also clearly delighting in the power and stuff that he has over this person. So he can say whatever he wants to himself and other people, but there's part of him that just enjoys having power over another human.
Yeah, and we also have to remember this conversation is in the context of him weaving a line of bullshit so Sorensen will do the ritual.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, he would distinguish himself a little bit from the big bad evil guy. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see. Matthew is like, I don't think you can claim he was intellectually honest. He said he'd been to other worlds. He said other people had been there too. That's not exactly honest, is it? And Ketterley doesn't like that. I don't like you very much, he said. I laughed. I can live with that, I said. That's just a funny interaction for me. Like, and this is before you know exactly what Ketterley's up to. But knowing that he's doing this terrible thing, or about to, he's just like every villain being like, ha ha ha. You know, just hanging it out there, like almost like toying with their victim. I don't like you very much. You know?
But I think you might be ascribing a level of like planning to Ketterley that isn't, or like of intent. I think he seized an opportunity. I don't think he was like actively. I don't think this whole time he was like, because this guy came randomly to his house, right? This isn't something he had. No, there's no indication that he knocks on his door and he's like, who are you? What are you doing here? And he's like, I'm this guy. I'm writing a book about this. So I think he seized on an opportunity, but I don't think this was premeditated on Ketterley's part. Like, I think even we don't know at what point in the conversation he decided to do this, right? Like, he does say, like, you're exactly what I need, which is a young, healthy man who can go do this for me. So clearly part of him, but I don't think this was like a trap from the jump. I don't think from the second Matthew walked to the door that this was Ketterley's plan all along. I think Ketterley seized an opportunity.
Yeah, definitely a crime of opportunity. I just had the thought, what if he's doing that thing killers do where they sort of hype themselves up to do the deed? And so he's like, I don't like you very much. He's saying like, this guy ain't shit. I can do to him whatever I want now because I've decided.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some of that. And he also, you know, obviously we're getting to the, like, nobody knows you're here. Nobody's, you know, like victims
scariest line in all of media.
Higher opportunity, right? Like higher risk where they don't have as many, you know, a lot of times people will take vulnerable people in society, if you're talking about like serial killers or something like that, because they know that there's way less chance that a homeless person or a sex worker is going to have strong support structures or people who will be immediately looking for them, or, you know, like so yeah, there's a bit of like justifying, I think, to himself, like, this person's not great, nobody's gonna really miss them, you know.
Yeah, they call it dehumanization. It's sort of a thing they do. Also, the objectification. There's a whole bunch of tactics, I guess, the killers use to prepare. So he asks, why did Ketterley think there was a labyrinth? And Ketterley says, a vision of cosmic grandeur, I suppose. a symbol of the mingled glory and horror of existence. No one gets out alive. So he doesn't want to admit at this point that it's a real thing.
I don't think that, because the question isn't why did he think there's a labyrinth? The question is, why did he call it a labyrinth? Why did he decide on that terminology for the other world?
Right.
So that's what he's explaining, not like why did he come up with this place, but why did he call it that?
It's interesting that he doesn't use the other version of a labyrinth, the meditative, contemplative, like, place to walk and, like, gather your thoughts or whatever. He's purely talking about the Minotaur, you know, Theseus. Because it's not a circle, right? I think of it as like a series of rectangles. The house.
I mean, a labyrinth is not, like, the physical shape of a labyrinth is not what meets the definition of a labyrinth.
Oh, it's not always circular?
Yeah,
shit.
a labyrinth can be any structure.
It can be any shape, huh?
Yeah, it doesn't have to meet. I'm
going to do a spherical labyrinth next time on Shattered Worlds. I'm always looking for things to torture my players with.
Of course.
Let's see. So Ketterley explains, Arne-Sayles claimed not to need a ritual, but the rest of them did. However, Sylvia also claimed she could slip in and out.
Which we've already had alluded to us before, that she didn't need a ritual. She could slip in and out as easily. Because, like, Arne-Sayles said that the first time that he met Piranesi.
Yeah.
As the prophet. He was like, I bet Ketterley he always needs, like, candles in a doorway and all that bullshit. And the only other one who could slip in and out like me was Sylvia.
Yeah. So Matthew asks if Ketterley could do it that way. He said he felt it, and once he saw it. But that's it. He said it was very much like Lawrence's description, like an infinite series of classical buildings knitted together. And that's when he says, I don't think it meant anything at all. So I feel like he's trying to keep Sorensen sort of in this weird gray area. That's why I think of it as like, it has him on a hook.
Yeah, well, he's definitely drawing him in at this point. I think he is deciding, this is where I think, he's like deciding to do this. And so he's trying to relate to him enough that he doesn't get suspicious. He's trying to go along with the, like, yeah, I mean, we were doing rituals and, there might have been drugs and I thought I saw something, but not saying like, yeah, no, I've fully been to another world. Like, I've fully been to it. Because at that point, Matthew is going to think that he's mentally unstable or deluded or something and isn't going to, continue to play along with him. Whereas if he's saying like, oh yeah, no, from a point of intellectual curiosity, if you want to, like, he tried to do rituals with us and stuff, and if you want to see the ritual, But if he goes like, yeah, no, there is another world, I've been there, like, that's gonna put him in a different position.
Right. He's gonna be like, I don't know if I want to do a ritual with a guy that might go nuts and hit me with a hammer or something. That's what he's thinking, right? I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's that people who, if you think somebody's mentally unstable, you're gonna be more wary around them. Like, it's gonna be, if you think somebody's delusional, you're gonna approach them differently.
So this is when he says the very scary thing. Does anyone know you're here? And we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but
which, like, stranger danger, Matthew. Like, if you don't know enough, like,
I'll be like, well, my
if
editor,
at the point where anybody asks
wife.
you, yes, if anybody knows you're here, I don't care if anybody actually does, you tell them 7 people who know that you're here.
I stopped by the police station earlier just to let them know what I was up to.
I have dinner plans in like a half an hour with, like, my old, like, National Guard unit or whatever. Like, you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, God. I'll remember that one. So then it's a period of suspense. He says, will it take long? It takes 12 minutes, he said. I don't have to take any drugs, do I? And he's like, you've had a cup of coffee. I think that'll be sufficient. Oh, man. So I'm thinking about like how suspenseful this is as I'm reading it. I'm like, oh, God. And even Matthew writing this after the fact, he goes, writing this, I feel a sort of terror descend on me. I know now what is coming. My hand is shaking, and I must stop writing for a moment to try to control it. But at the time, I felt nothing. No presentiment of danger. Nothing. And isn't that how it is when we have a trauma, especially when somebody betrays us or attacks us or whatever? Like, we want to make a story of it and being like, oh, I should have noticed something. Or
I should have been able to tell. I should have known this was coming. And so
it's all
often
hindsight.
you don't. Yeah.
Let's see. So they do the thing, and everything's switched. It was as if the world had somehow just stopped. He fell silent. The Berlioz was cut off mid-chorus. My eyelids were still closed, but I could tell that the quality of the darkness had changed. It was grayer, cooler. The air felt colder and much damper, as if we'd been plunged into a fog. Man, that's an exciting introduction. It's so odd to have, like, Piranesi's sort of, I've always been here. It's great. Look at how pretty it is. And here we have a guy going, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Oh, man. So Ketterley says some messed up stuff. He says, forgive me for not saying anything before now, he smiled. But I really am delighted to see you. A young, healthy man is just what I wanted. Not okay, dude.
No.
Not what you want to hear. Oh, man. I'm watching a series called Dark Matter, and there's a moment kind of like that. It's, yeah. Spooky. Because, like, you don't know if you're ever going to make it home. You don't know what this place is. And the guy just left you there?
Well, I mean, he hasn't left him there yet.
Hmm.
He's in the process of leaving him there, but he has not yet been left there.
I think I was thinking that because right at the start of the next chapter, we're back in Piranesi's head.
Mm-hmm.
So part 6, Wave, Piranesi vomits and realizes that Ketterley is not his friend.
Mm-hmm.
He is my enemy. He's thinking about how he's been forgetting. He's having multiple revelations. And this really reminded me of when I realized a partner was cheating or stealing. It's like, well, what else is true? Like, oh, God, there was that time that one thing happened and there was that weird phone call. And, you know, it's like this chain of thoughts that goes back into the distant past. You know, how long has this been happening? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. What was a lie? What wasn't?
Mm-hmm. Oh, man. So next he's worried about, like, forgetting again. And so he's trying to, like, think of how not to make that happen. And this is where he just goes, like, nuts in his own head. No, 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 no. I could not bear the thought of it. I pressed my head between my hands as if I could physically keep the memories from escaping. Poor guy.
Well, this is also where he's having, like, some of his experiences with like a dual sense of self, because he talks, he's gonna start sobbing and stuff, and then he's like, that's not me, that's Matthew. So this is where he's starting to get like the split personalityness of like, there are two people in here, and whose reactions are which person's.
Remember, all caps, remember, the other is not your friend. He tricked Matthew Rose Sorensen into coming into this world for his own advantage. For his own advantage. He starts thinking about how Ketterley needs a slave to do his work for him. And then he wishes that he hadn't warned Ketterley about the flood.
Yes, he fantasizes about the flood killing him, or if he'd lied about it, and that he already told him about it, so he can't do that.
Yeah, and so now we're in this whole, like, we gotta murder Ketterley situation. And I don't blame him. He also thinks I could kidnap him and tie him up. Let's see. I wrote, there's a killer monologue wink. I'm not sure what I meant by that.
I mean, it's his monologue about, when he's fantasizing about different ways to kill him. I think that's probably what you meant by killer monologue.
Yeah, perhaps I will. Oh, killer
right, killer
monologue.
In the sense of great, and also in the sense of his fantasizing about different ways to kill him.
That is so embarrassing. In my notes, the wink is for me.
Mm-hmm.
Whoops. Okay. Perhaps I will give him water to drink. Perhaps I will not. Perhaps I will say to him, soon you will have plenty of water. And on Thursday, he will watch the tides pouring in through the doors, and he will scream and scream. And I will laugh and laugh. I will laugh as long and as loud as he laughed at Matthew Rose Sorensen when he brought him here. This is where I lost myself. Now, when he says this is where I lost myself, he's kind of breaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I'm not this killer guy. I'm falling apart here. He fantasizes more about killing him. These imaginings left me ravaged. I do not think I could have felt more exhausted if I really had murdered someone 100 times over. My thighs ached, my back ached, my head ached. My eyes and throat were sore with weeping and shouting. Yeah. It'd be like that sometimes. So he gets some food. He thinks about what he read. Sorensen had this stuff happen to him, and he resides within Piranesi. He goes, I placed my hand on my chest. Hush now, I said. Do not be afraid. You are safe. Go back to sleep. I will take care of us both. He's such a helpful, supportive guy.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I have to ask, was he like this before?
I don't know. I mean, I think, again, like the core of him seems to be very thoughtful and empathetic. So I don't think that's just the house. Because I think when you remove any sort of... I think if you removed all previous knowledge of your life and whatever from someone like Ketterley, he would not act like this, right? So...
That's interesting. Huh. Yeah, I guess I would hope I would be kind, but I'd also be extremely argumentative. I've been that way since I was young. Let's see. As far as I could tell, Matthew Rose Sorensen was in his right mind when he wrote them. Neither he nor I had ever been mad. The other is the one trying to drive him mad, not 16. Next, he considers 16's last message. He realizes he's probably Ketterley's only victim. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think... I don't think he did anything. Like I said, he's an opportunist. An opportunity came along with this one. He doesn't want to endanger himself, so he trapped somebody else there. But I don't think he was actively imprisoning or killing anybody else.
Okay, so he's kind of making it up as he goes along. He's not even
Once again,
following
all he can do
Arne-Sayles.
is... Well, no, but he is stealing Arne-Sayles' bit, right? Like, this is what Arne-Sayles did. Arne-Sayles did it to at least a couple of people, probably. But
did Ketterley know his process? Yeah. Oh.
I mean, this is like, because the Italian at dinner, right? Like, the dishy this is what they did. They lured him in, they got him interested, they took him to the other world, and they left him there. You know, poor James Ritter and stuff like that. Like, all he can think to do, and he thinks he's working on his own, right? But all he can think to do really is replicate what Arne-Sayles did.
Terrible. Let's see. Why had 16 come? Because she was looking for Matthew Rose Sorensen. Because she wanted to rescue him from the slavery of the other. I saw it clearly now. It is 16 that is my friend, and not the other. 16 was patient, resolute, and ingenious. 16 was still looking for me. It's nice to have him go from like the depths of despair, and now he's hopeful again. He discovers that someone wiped away his warning about the flood for 16, as well as her question to him. What was that question? All the other messages were here, but not that one.
I think it was the "Are you Matthew
That's
Rose
the one.
Sorensen?"
Yeah, she did with the big pebbles,
so he couldn't not read it. Yeah.
Cool. He decides that Ketterley did it. He thinks Ketterley is intentionally tricking 16 into dying in the flood. I can't remember exactly how he gets to that, but that's, yeah.
Well, because he was talking, one of the last conversations he had with Ketterley before this was the, like, we need to warn 16. And Ketterley is like, why? 16 is our enemy and stuff like that. And he's like, well, but, you know, just because we don't want to talk to 16 and let them drive us mad doesn't mean that we should just let them die in a flood. And then Ketterley's like, no, we should let them die in a flood. And
So Piranesi's getting ready for the tides. He moves the dead's bones higher up. He stashes his journals high up. He gathers up all his rain bowls. And then he comes across a bag full of gear in the Hall of Horned Giants. I took out all the contents. They were as follows: a gun, a quantity of folded material made of a dense, heavy plastic. This was by far the largest object in the bag. It filled most of the bag and was colored blue, black, and gray. A small cylindrical container with a secure lid. This contained other small objects, the purpose of which was unclear. A thing like a slice of a larger cylinder cut down at an angle with a yellow hose coming out of it. 2 black plastic rods extendable to a length of approximately 2 meters, and 4 black paddle shapes. And he thinks that maybe the house left the bag for him. But then he decides it's probably the other because there's a gun. And why would the house give him a gun?
Yeah.
Day of the flood comes. He has some soup. And then he goes looking for 16. I remembered the words of the prophet. The closer 16 gets, the more dangerous Ketterley will become. My hope was that I could find 16 before she reached the other. He goes back and forth between the boat area and the first vestibule. And somewhere in there, the other appears. He's dressed casually, which he's never dressed casually before. He's in like jeans or something.
Yeah, he's in it. Jeans, tennis shoes, and a hoodie.
Yeah, and he's got a life jacket. I don't know if Piranesi knows what a life jacket is, but that's what is described. He follows Ketterley to the boat. There's still no sign of 16, and he's starting to worry. The tides are beginning to converge. The other is pumping up the boat. The waves start to thud. And then he realizes 16 is clever, right? 16 has been like being methodical, looking for him in a particular way, staying away from Ketterley. Like, there's evidence that she may have come here before and is watching. I had a mental image of both 16 and myself hiding in the first western hall, both waiting for the other one to appear. I could not afford to remain hidden any longer. I stepped down from the niche and walked towards the other. And the gun is just sitting out there in the open. The other is pissed. Piranesi starts quoting his journal. I visited him in mid-November, I said. It was just after 4, a cold blue twilight. And the other isn't listening. He starts giving him orders. He says to bash Raphael in the head. That's 16's name, I guess. Now we know that. And Piranesi keeps quoting. The afternoon had been stormy, I said, and the lights of the cars were pixelated by rain, the pavements collaged with wet black leaves. When I got to his house, I heard music playing, I said, a requiem. I waited for him to answer the door to an accompaniment of Berlioz. And Kay's getting spooked. He's like, what are you talking about? Piranesi says, or Matthew says, no, is it Piranesi? I guess it's still Piranesi.
It's Piranesi.
Oh, but he's quoting.
He's quoting Matthew's journals.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, he's quoting it at something like it's something that Ketterley would recognize, but Ketterley has never read these journals. So it isn't until he hits on a word that he knows Piranesi shouldn't know. Mm-hmm. Like referencing a specific composer and stuff that he's like, wait, what are you talking about? But Piranesi is like, quoting something that's very meaningful to him that Ketterley has never read before. So
yeah. And Battersea is close, right? There's a Battersea here in Manchester.
Well, and Battersea is not only where he lived when he like abducted Matthew, but also one of the words he used to test if Piranesi remembered anything. So
Ketterley tries to distract Piranesi by calling him Matthew. He laughs suddenly, an odd sound, hysteria masquerading as relief. No, he said. You don't get me that easily. Those aren't your words. They're someone else's. You don't really remember. Raphael put you up to this. Really, Matthew, how stupid do you think I am? And then he goes for the gun. Piranesi kicks it away. Ketterley asks him what he's going to do. 16 calls Ketterley's name. And she says she's looking for Matthew Rose Sorensen. Ketterley grabs Piranesi and says, here he is. Piranesi warns her about the gun. And the waves start to rush in for real now. 16 steps away, or she steps out of the shadows. Ketterley tries to hit Piranesi. Piranesi gets loose, runs to 16. He takes her hand. They run to the wall. This is what I was saying about like everything's ramping up and it's very like journalistic. It's like X happened, Y happened, so on and so forth. They climb up the father and son statue. She's too short to follow. He comes down and pushes her higher up. They make it 20 odd feet up. And then there's some cracking sounds. Ketterley's shooting at them. Piranesi warns him to get in the boat because it's like the water is too high. You got to get in that damn boat. But he keeps shooting, so they have to get up behind the statue in a little alcove. He peeks out. He sees Ketterley trying to get to the boat now. He's waiting. The boat is swirling. He says it's dancing around the hall. Ketterley's hopelessly swimming after it. The boat will like come at him and then fly away.
Well, it's not even that he's swimming. He's walking. And as the water's getting deeper, it's pushing against him more. Right, so he would be more likely to catch it if he were swimming, but he's not. He's like trying to wade through the water. And so the boat is like dancing around on top with all the different currents. And he's getting more weighed down the more water enters the chamber.
If he'd worked with Piranesi, they could have tied a fishing net to it and used it to, like, keep it handy or whatever. But instead he had to be a dickhead. So Piranesi shouts for Ketterley to climb higher. A big wave crashes. The spray goes flying up. And that's when he realizes if they hadn't hidden from the shots behind the statue in that little alcove, they would have been thrown clear, drowned, killed, whatever. And that's when my note says, destiny? Is destiny a thing in this story? Or is that just Piranesi looks for these patterns and like connections and things because he has that mystical sort of mindset.
Right. I don't think the book has the definitive answer to that. Like, I don't think the book is like, that's the kind of thing that happens in real life all the time that people read intent into, like the universe looking out for them or trying to send them in a specific place or, you know, serendipity, anything like that. But also, and it could be, you know, we don't know the parameters really of the house, but also it's the kind of thing that people read into situations all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. The spray caught the sun. It was as if someone had suddenly thrown 100 barrelfuls of diamonds into the hall. That's a nice image.
Mm-hmm.
But that's when Ketterley eats it. The boat keeps swirling about. The waves continue for a time. And it's so loud that 16 and Piranesi don't talk to each other for a while. 16 had large dark eyes and an elfin face. Her expression was solemn. She was a little older than me, about 40, I thought. Her hair was black with wet. You are Raphael. I like that. It's like he's stepped away from his nomenclature and he's accepting this new reality that she is Raphael. She says he's Matthew Rose Sorensen, that she doesn't actually know him from anywhere. She's here because she's a police officer. And I was like, oh, she's a police officer. I mean, oh, like, like it's great. I would love it if all police officers were like this, but it is...
Any police officers are like this. This is the thing that they call like the Olivia Benson effect.
Olivia Benson.
I don't know if you're familiar with like Law and Order SVU, right? But it is...
Is that Mariska Hargitay?
Yes. So Olivia Benson is her character. And they've talked about the way that so many people believe because of shows like Law and Order, stuff that's called propaganda. Like, propaganda is partially a factor of one of the very first sort of procedural cop shows. Was set in LA, LAPD Blue, and they worked with the police department. And basically, they wanted to do this procedural show, and the police department was like, we'll give you access to stuff like cop cars and stations and stuff, but we basically get input on the scripts. And so this was the thing too, where they would start with the like ripped from the headlines, like based on a true story stuff. And that was sort of one of the first procedural shows that led to all the Dick Wolf shows and whatever. But cops only solve about 2% of crimes, all crimes. And shows like Law and Order and Law and Order SVU in particular, because Law and Order SVU is dealing specifically with like sex crimes and stuff. So it's very, and the two main cops, I mean, Olivia Benson being a main one, but also Christopher Maloney played her partner for years, and them together would go to these extraordinary lengths to achieve justice for the victims in their cases, right? That is not how anything actually works. Cops don't spend weeks and weeks going out of their way, risking their jobs, doing all of this stuff to get justice for individual victims, like particularly in sex crimes. Like, it is hard enough to believe in ordinary crimes, but the amount of like untested rape kits that exist, the amount of like write-off that people do of sex crimes, we know that sexual assault and rape are like underreported crimes. But this perception in the culture, because of shows like Law and Order SVU and characters like Olivia Benson, who nothing is more important to them than like bringing justice to their victims or saving their victims, has led people to have a false sense of security with the police and what reporting a crime and stuff actually is. So there's a significant number of people who have reported specifically because of like watching SVU and then been treated completely differently by the system because they did not have an understanding of how it actually operates. They had this fictionalized, romanticized view. And I cannot imagine a cop in a world where a cop solved 2% of crimes and have taken people to the Supreme Court level multiple times to prove that they are not responsible for protecting anybody, would spend years and go to another dimension to rescue somebody that they'd never met, that was just a missing persons case that they happened to catch.
Yeah, I mean, some of my favorite shows, X-Files, Fringe, you know, you got the FBI, they're supposedly better than regular cops, you know, and it's like in reality, the FBI mostly like hires snitches, you know. But in terms of sexual assault cases in Washington State, 96% have gone unsolved in the last 10 years, I think is the latest statistic I saw. It's absurd.
Yeah, it's like just the fact that we keep, and you know, you want to have heroes in fiction, and we have grown up, and again, this is sort of like possibly completely unintended inherited biases, right? Like law enforcement in fiction solves crimes and rescues people. Rarely in real life does anything like that happen.
Oh, it's frustrating. I mean, what if there's an alien werewolf attack? Is the FBI going to get their shit together? Or are they going to... Oh,
Probably
man, I almost
not.
brought up 9/11.
At least in the case of X-Files, they were like outcasts.
They always got pushed back.
That was part of the, like, the structures of government law enforcement were there to aid and abet conspiracy theories and stuff like that. And they were
and slow them
outliers and fringe. Yeah. And the fact that they were trying to actually like solve any of these things.
It's a bit like House, too, how he will go to extraordinary lengths, but like in real life, half your time is spent at the budget office, like trying to figure out how to pay for all these things. Like,
yeah, well, so many doctors being completely hamstrung by like insurance companies and stuff, and then also just the sort of medical biases that also exist. So in like half of your time with a doctor is just spent trying to convince them that you actually have something happening. Especially if you're a woman or a person of color.
I was gonna say you can probably speak to that more effectively than I can.
Oh yeah, it takes a woman on average 4 years to get the same diagnosis that it takes a man on average 6 months to get.
That's great.
Yep. And that's why we have much higher fatality rates, because women take so much longer to convince anybody that they actually have a condition, that a lot of times it's progressed past the most treatable stages by the time they get anybody to believe them.
Terrible. Oh,
also,
man.
Even kids are more likely to be treated if their father brings them in instead of their mother. If their mother brings them into the doctor, they are more likely to be written off as like paranoid, hysterical, overprotective parent, whereas if the dad brings the kids in for the exact same medical problem, they are much more likely to be taken seriously as like, well, the dad wouldn't be bringing them in unless there was really something wrong, so we have to check this out.
The government should provide temporary dads to do this service.
To just come in and say like, hey, this person has a real problem.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a man. Look at all my maleness. You should listen to me.
It's so fucked up. I'm sorry.
Look, there's a lot of systems that are fucked up.
So Piranesi thinks they're both freaked out by Ketterley's death. She tends to his wound. It looks like he was hurt by shrapnel and not a bullet. She can't get down the statue, so he goes off to find some way to help her. I think he uses nets or something. He collects some gear, returns. He feeds her some seaweed.
Gives her some fresh water. Shows her how to climb down the nets.
And then we get a nice little moment. Our clothes were plastered to our bodies with wet. My hair, which is dark and curly, was as full of droplets as a cloud. I rained every time it moved. He talks to the birds. It'll be gone soon, I told them. Don't worry. What? Asked Raphael, startled. I don't understand. I was talking to the birds, I said. They're alarmed by the great quantities of water that are everywhere. I'm telling them that it'll soon be gone. She wonders why he talks to birds, and he mentions that she did too. When she said, like, piss off or something to that effect.
To the rooks, yes.
Yeah. She asks why he scrubbed away her writing, and he says because Ketterley said she was evil and was trying to make him go mad. She says we should go home. He can come stay at her place, and then she can take him home. And he says, I am home, to which she does not respond. She tells him why he should leave. There's something I have to tell you, she said. I don't know if you remember this, but you have a mom and a dad, and 2 sisters, and friends. She gazed at me intently. Do you remember? I shook my head. They've been looking for you, she said, but they didn't know the right place to look. They've been worried about you. They've been... She looked away again to find the right words to express her thought. They felt pain because they didn't know where you were. I thought that was a really nice way to put that. It's like she's not talking down to him necessarily, but she's really laying it out there.
Yeah, this isn't, we get a little bit more at the end when we talk about like how cool she seems and how she just seems, she's very empathetic to people. She understands, she's not trying to force him. She understands that this is a guy whose brain has not been, he doesn't remember who he is. He doesn't, but he's displayed a lot of care, and she figures that the way to like persuade, she's not trying to force him. She's just saying like, look, there are people who are suffering because they don't know what happened to you. Yeah. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, but it would be nice to give them some closure to let them know that, she's very both intuitive and empathetic in the way that she handles this, and is like, knows how to talk to him in a way that isn't freaking him out, but is persuasive.
She wouldn't necessarily know that that was the best approach, but she has seen him save her life and try to save Ketterley's life.
She knows when he was scared to see her or talk to her that he was still trying to warn her about like danger, right?
Yeah,
he was like, you're evil, you can't trick me. He wrote a whole message about like that, but he was still like, by the way, this is going to be dangerous on this day. So even in the midst of when he's like, you're sinister and you can't catch me out, also don't be here on the Thursday because it's going to be dangerous.
So she's starting to get the sense that he doesn't think he's Sorensen. And she's not contentious, which Piranesi likes. And then she asks if he would make a visit to Sorensen's family, but he could come back. And he explains that he has to stay to take care of the bones, people of the alcove and so on. And she's surprised to hear there are other people. She'd like to see them, to, put eyes on them. And he's like, oh, they're dead. And she's like, what? And he's like, he thinks they were dead before he got there, but he can't be certain. And then he asks if she has dead in her halls. Does she visit them and take them offerings? And she's like, does she realize what he's talking about?
Yeah, no, I think he elucidates, because at first she's just talking about other people that he has to take care of, and she's like, what people? And then he's like, oh, dead people or whatever. And then he's like, I take care of them. And she's like, what do you mean take care of them? And then he's like, I go visit them. I leave them offerings. Do you not have dead that you visit and leave offerings? And then I think she connects it to like, yeah, no, this is just like bringing flowers to a gravestone, even if it's not bringing flowers to a gravestone.
Yeah. So then he says, we got to collect Ketterley's body, and she says there's plenty of time. At some point, I think maybe they've done that. She touches his shoulder, and he starts crying, and he thinks it must be Matthew Rose Sorensen inside him crying. He asks if she'll come back. She says she will. And she asks if he'll think about seeing Sorensen's family, and he says he will think about it. My last thought before I fell asleep was, he is dead, my only friend, my only enemy.
Well, and does that in the beginning of the next chapter, or where he thinks about like that he is alone in the house because he has never thought of himself as alone until now.
Yeah, I don't know if that's here or later,
Is that in
but
the picking
yeah.
up when we come back in the next part? Yeah.
One follows on the other. So he finds Ketterley. He explains how he'll treat the corpse. I will put you in good order, and you can rest in the sunlight and the starlight. The statues will look down on you with blessing. He finds the boat. He says, I wish that you had saved him. I told it. I did not feel that it responded in any way. It seemed drowsy, dozing, only half alive, without the rushing waters to animate it. It was no longer the devil that had danced on the waves, first mocking Dr. Ketterley and then abandoning him. I love Piranesi. He's so thoughtful.
I do like the irony of how he's going to take care of his body and incorporate him into the house in a way that like Piranesi thinks of as being kind and respectful and would like somebody to do for him. And you can just imagine how much Ketterley would hate that. Like,
he's not religious, right?
I don't know if he is or not, but he does not want to be in the house forever. Like he only wanted to get things out of the house. He never liked or appreciated the house. He always hated it. He always thought it was damp and like spooky and dirty, and like he did not, you can imagine somebody like Sylvia, even though we never, just from what we've gleaned of her, would kind of enjoy staying in the house forever, like her remains being there, right? But like Ketterley, it's the last thing he would want. But it's Piranesi being kind is sort of like an ironic punishment for Ketterley.
Yes. Raphael asks what she should call him. He starts to say Piranesi, but falters. And then he says Ketterley used to call him that, but Ketterley was a dick.
So it was probably mocking, whether I understood the reference or not. And she's like, yeah, that sounds like him.
So Raphael tells him how she found him, and then an owl flies in. Piranesi's never seen a real live one. Raphael interviewed Sayles. He explains what happens to Sorensen. Does that ring a bell?
So how she first figured out, like how they first is that the author who had wrote the previous book on Arne-Sayles that he references in his journals earlier, he had gone to interview her and say that he was working on a book, and then she didn't hear anything from him from like 6 months. So she called his university, and his university said he's been missing basically since the time he came and talked to you. And that's what clues the cops in to the fact that he was looking into Arne-Sayles before he disappeared. And so that's when they go look into Arne-Sayles, because the other writer who wrote a book about Arne-Sayles was following up with him about like, hey, how's that book going? And they're like, oh, he's gone. He's been missing. And that's how they get to Arne-Sayles. And then the other cops were ready to dismiss Arne-Sayles as like, and she was like, no, this guy likes to talk. If I just let him talk, I'll get something from him.
Man, let's see. Piranesi talks about how things from the older world are represented by statues. Raphael promises to come back, whether he visits the other world or not. He gives her a tour of the halls. And she says, it's such an astonishing place, a perfect place. I saw some of it while I was looking for you, but I kept having to stop at the doors to write out the directions back to the Minotaur room. It got very time-consuming and frustrating, and of course I didn't dare go too far in case I made a mistake. It's a good thing she was so cautious, because she didn't lose her memory from staying there too long.
Yeah, well, I think you have to spend more time than that. Like, I think, Ketterley was keeping it to an hour, but Matthew was writing for days in his journal. I think as himself, before he started to, I think you would have to spend more than, she was never there for more than like a few hours, I don't think, at a time. I think you have to spend days there before it starts.
Cool. Piranesi remembers that early on he had to use chalk to mark his path. he's having more internal wrestling with truth. Raphael asks if she can take photos. He says yes, and he thinks how nice it is that she's respectful of the house. He shows her the people of the alcove. Raphael regarded them gravely. She gently rested her hand on one of the bones, the tibia of one of the males. It was a gesture conveying comfort and reassurance. Don't be afraid. You are safe. I am here. It's so lovely. Like, she's doing this all just for him, right? Just to connect with him.
I don't think that's the case. I think she is doing it for him. I think she's coming back to talk to him and to see him. Like, that is, originally she's visiting to try and make him feel comfortable and persuade him. But she also, I think, is genuinely curious and drawn to the house. Like, I do not think, which is a thing that, like, in the epilogue we get to a little bit, but, like, her reverence for the house and stuff is not, I think, to make him feel better. I mean, I think she's a person who's respectful by nature, and she can see that this is important to him. But I also think she also sees it as beautiful and special, and, I think a kind of appreciation and reverence comes naturally to her. Like, when he talks about her response to the bones and stuff, it's sadder than his, because she's bringing associations of, like, these people were killed, not just that they are dead, but that they were killed. So there's, like, a sadness to her reverence that isn't in his. But I just think I think she is genuinely curious about it. Like, who wouldn't be?
Yeah.
I think she also thinks it's beautiful. So I think she's coming there to make a connection with Piranesi, to make him feel comfortable with coming back to the other world, to the quote-unquote real world. But I do think that her, like, interest and respect for the house is not feigned for his sake.
Yeah. It made me wonder if she, like, at the morgue, I don't know if she does homicide, but, like, treating a body respectfully. Because I could see after you've seen enough corpses, you might sort of think of them as things rather than people.
Sure, but that hasn't been any indication that we've gotten of her. Right?
She's not a battle-hardened homicide detective.
Well, no, just that she cares deeply, right? Nobody else is going to spend 6 years looking for missing persons with this kind of energy who didn't care. Like, if she was the kind of person who had gotten desensitized to, like, human suffering, she would not be doing any of this.
He shows her the people of the alcove, or she apologizes for his experience, basically empathizing with him. I was astonished, even a little alarmed. No one has ever been as kind to me as Raphael. No one has ever done more for me. That she should apologize seemed to me inappropriate. No, no, I murmured, and I put up my hands to fend off her words. Being a loved one of a narcissist, or anyone who, for whatever reason, withholds support or affection or whatever, when you finally get it, it feels like this, right? Like when I went to therapy after my divorce, and, like, I was like, oh, I can accept, a person's support. I don't deserve to be treated this way. It's pretty daunting when it first happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think receiving genuine care when you haven't can be very sort of shocking. But also, I think this is also partially just the, like, when you say I'm sorry to somebody and they'll be like, why? You didn't do anything. Right. And I was like, yeah, no, but there's two types of being sorry. There's the apology sorry that is, like, taking responsibility for inflicting something on somebody, and then there's the I am sorry that you are experiencing this, I empathize with your struggle, sorry. And
interesting that it's the same phrase.
Yeah, that we don't have different words for it.
Yeah, so he wants to avoid the thought that the people were murdered. Mostly I wanted Raphael to come away from them, so that I could stop thinking of them the way she thought of them, as murdered, and go back to thinking of them the way I always had before, as good and noble and peaceful. Yeah, they're like his family. Like, he wants to think the best of them.
It's not even like he doesn't want the. It's not that he wants to think the best of them in the fact that, like, he doesn't want to think of them as having suffered.
Yeah.
Like, that has never been his perception of them, you know? And so he doesn't like this darkness that she's bringing, even as she's displaying also care and empathy for them. But there's never been any particular sadness about their being dead. Like, he builds stories about them. He lives in a place without, like, these are the only traces of other people, but also where he sees, like, cycles of life in, like, a very, that these are just people who are in a different state of being. And her bringing her external reference to it makes him have to think about their deaths being possibly something violent or scary or painful. Yeah. And he doesn't like putting that on them.
So next, he's taking her on the tour, and he shows her a place we've never gotten to see in this detail, the coral halls. There are figures horned with coral, or crucified on coral branches, or stuck through with coral arrows. There is a lion enmeshed in a cage of coral, and a man holding a little box. The coral has grown so profusely over his left side that half of him appears to be engulfed in red and rose-colored flames, while the other half is not. It's like she saved some, like, really great imagery for, like, right near the end of the book.
Yeah. He's referenced the coral halls before, but he hasn't been in them in the course of the book, so this is the first description we get.
This makes me think of, like, if I was introducing someone to my city or my hometown, like
where do you take them?
Yeah. I got lots of spots. She expresses appreciation that there are no people in the house. He asks if she doesn't like the people in her own halls. "Don't you like the people in your own halls?" I asked, puzzled. "I like them," she said, with no very great enthusiasm. "Mostly I like them. Some of them. I don't always get them. They don't always get me." I don't think there's a section of this book that speaks to me more than that right there. Like, humanity, there's so goddamn many of us. And so many of them are unpleasant on any given day. He considers why one might not want to be around people. Perhaps even people you like and admire immensely can make you see the world in ways you would rather not. Perhaps that is what Raphael means.
Well, that's clearly him reflecting on the experience he just had he likes Raphael and he wants to spend a bunch of time with her, but he doesn't like that she's complicated things, right? How he sees things, like the dead, Yeah.
Yeah, it really is true, right? They say that you don't just have one friend, you have a friend who is somebody else's friend, it's somebody else's friend. Like, they all see that same person a little differently, and then the person themselves sees themselves differently.
I'm trying to think. There's this Italian artist. He's the one who did the Pope being hit by the meteorite. I'm trying to think of what his name is. He did a bunch of art projects that were like very, but he did this one where he had a bunch of friends and family members describe him to sketch artists.
Ooh.
And then he displayed them all together, and you see how different he looks depending on both the person who's describing him and the sketch artist that they're describing him to. So these are all people who know him well, who would recognize him easily, and yet he can look very different from each of their perspectives.
That's fascinating. Italian artist, hired sketch artists. I'm going to look that up afterwards.
I mean, I think to find his name, look up the Pope getting hit by the meteor statue, because that's one of his most famous pieces, because it was obviously very controversial. He had a whole thing where the MoMA in New York a few years ago was like a retrospective of his entire career, and I got to see it.
Ooh.
But I am totally blanking on his name right now.
Yeah, it causes a lot of friction when you make someone see the world in a way they would rather not. But
Maurizio Catalan. I'm sorry for my terrible pronunciation.
Maurizio Catalan, like the Spanish region.
Cattelan.
Catalan, interesting. Yeah, in ways you would rather not. Like bad leaders and like bad friends, they take everything personally. And so they don't want to take that stuff on. But if you're open and kind and sensitive and stuff, you take in people's criticism or challenging ideas, and integrate them. And yeah, it's hard. It's challenging, but it's the only way to live and be a decent person. I don't know, in my opinion anyway. He resolves to leave with Raphael. I have returned all of the dead to their allotted places. Today I walked through the halls as I have done 1,000 times before. I visited all my most beloved statues, and as I gazed on each one, I thought, perhaps this will be the last time I look on your face. Goodbye. Goodbye. And I ask, what must it be like to leave your entire life behind? I guess we don't know anybody that did that because we don't know them anymore.
I mean, I think everybody has experienced a version of this, though, right? Like, most of us have never had amnesia and left the only place we've known of existing, but every one of us has had big transitional steps, right?
Yeah.
The first time you leave home, you start school, you go to a foreign country. All of those are versions of this. Though obviously very few have experienced something as total and complete as leaving behind the only universe you can currently remember.
Yeah, I think the closest real world analog would be somebody like an immigrant forced by circumstance. I guess a refugee is a better word for it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still Earth, and there's a chance their country might turn things around and they could go back or at least visit.
Well, even if they never intend to return to where they're going, there's still a continuity of memory of understanding, like the world, right?
Yeah.
This is somebody stepping from the only place he can remember existing into something that he has no real frame of reference for, although he does, because we know that he has like context for knowing what a garden is, even though he's never seen one, so like there is knowledge that's still happening in his brain, but yeah.
So just before he leaves, he puts all his ornaments back into his hair, and Raphael seems astonished, like she appreciates his cool look.
I don't know that she appreciates. I don't think that's the tone of the description. It's that
really?
she's
Let me pull this up
kind
here.
of surprised by it. Like she's a little taken aback.
When Raphael arrived, she seemed rather astonished at my pleasant appearance. That's all we get.
Yeah. Pleasant appearance is his interpretation of how he looks, though. Because he thinks his ornaments and stuff are beautiful, but, she's only seen him one way, and then he comes out all, like, bedecked with his handmade ornaments. I imagine that's a little...
Oh, God, that moment, if they ever make a show, like, just seeing him come out all resplendent with all his flair. I took one last look at the eternal house. I shivered. Raphael took my hand. Then, together, we walked into the corridor. And I thought that could be a perfect end to a novel. And so I'm interested to find out why there's another chapter.
I I think I'm fine with an ambiguous ending, but there's lots of people who are not. My little sister is one of them. She hates an ambiguous ending. Like, this does give you closure on the immediate story, right? But it doesn't give you any indication of how he fares or what happens next. And I think that there are a lot of people who like, you know, an epilogue. Yeah. They like some indication of what has happened since the events of the story.
Okay, so next time is the last chapter, chapter 7, Matthew Rose Sorensen. So we'll cover that next time, and a little recap of the book, preview of where we're going next. And that brings me to our first official segment, which is Check the Google Doc. We're gonna pick something new.
We're not gonna wait until the wrap-up episode to pick something new?
No, I like picking now, because then we'll be able to weave that into our chat, and having had a little time to think about it. Unless you think that's weird, in which case we can...
No, we can do it now.
Okay, cool. Having a business meeting on the air. Selection list. Here we go. So I put numbers to each of the sections so I could do a random number generator thing. So we're doing science fiction next. So let me pull up this random number thingy. Random.org. So most of these are things we've done or we've mentioned on the show. I may have added one that we haven't. So there's 15 actually, because I added Fallout just because it's so damn good. So some of these are like a TV show and a video game, or a book, movie, radio show, book, TV show, TV, movie. So what I thought was, if we get Doctor Who, say, or The War of the Worlds, then from there we'll kind of pick which format. So 1 to 15. I'm generating. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't like the choice, if it doesn't seem right, we'll pick something else. Oh shit! We mentioned it on the show already. It's the X-Files. Are you excited?
Oh yeah, I'm a huge X-Files fan.
Okay, now there's two ways we could go here. We could just pick one of our favorite episodes. We could start at the beginning, or we could randomize it. There's 11 seasons, we could really...
There's really only
7.
5.
Oh.
7. Yeah, no, the first movie is sort of where I cut it off.
Okay.
I mean, I've seen past that, but that was the whole time where David Duchovny wanted to do other things. Like, he felt like he'd only been... Their contracts were up. And David Duchovny wanted to do other things. But that show was making so much money for Fox that they threw a bunch of money at him. So he did, in my opinion, they all did the worst possible thing, which is he didn't agree to come back full time, but they threw so much money at him that he agreed to like a partial contract where he would come back for a certain number of episodes, but not all the episodes. And so to do that, they had to write all these weird reasons why like Mulder wasn't there, and it just, the show went so rapidly downhill from that point on. So
okay, so would you rather randomize one from those 5 seasons, or do the first one?
Why don't we do the pilot?
Hell
and
yeah.
Then each of us pick a favorite episode.
Okay. Ooh, I like this. Okay.
Because I think that's a way to get a sense of the whole show. Yeah. We do the pilot, we do their very first episode, and then we can talk about that in one episode of our show, and then we can each pick an episode and have an episode, because that'll give you sort of like a feel of the entire series without having everybody go through 7 to 11 years of material.
Okay, so I'm looking through the episodes here. Dwayne Barry is pretty good. Little Green Men.
I mean, Tombs is great. Humbug is great.
So I'm thinking Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose.
That is another one of my favorite episodes. Yes, that's a great one.
One of the finest. But there's also the one where Scully sees her dad.
Mm-hmm.
Does that ring a bell?
Well, why don't we start with the pilot episode and then each of us pick a favorite?
Okay.
After that.
Okay, I'll just do Clyde. We'll talk about it off air. And,
yeah.
Oh, and that we can talk about that when we come back for our
right.
book
That's what
recap.
I'm saying. We have
perfect.
Yeah. We have a wrap up episode, so we can both think about what our favorite episode is and come back with it, and then we'll let people know, and they can watch the pilot and those 2 episodes.
Hell yeah! All right. Well, any final thoughts on this section?
Nope.
I love Raphael.
Mm-hmm. She's
love
awesome.
Piranesi. My shipping soul wants them to get together, but like that probably won't happen. I kind of would love to see him have a reunion with his family. I always love those in stories.
Curious to see their response after not
How
seeing
could you
him for
ever
6 years.
Explain that shit to them? Oh man, I don't know how that would even happen. I'm putting a check mark next to X-Files so we know it's our next episode or series. Are we doing a 3-ep series, or are we going to do all 3? I guess we could talk about that next time too.
Yeah.
Oh shit! Any recommendations? Anything you've been enjoying of late?
We're reading Camp Damascus, which is Chuck Tingle's first full-length novel, and it's a horror novel. If you are only familiar with Chuck Tingle from his very funny erotica, then like Camp Damascus is like a whole other side of Chuck Tingle's writing ability. And
wow. So it's not erotica.
no, it's a horror novel about a Christian conversion camp.
Ooh. Now, is Chuck Tingle gay?
I think Chuck Tingle is beyond labeled description.
But like he might have had experience with this or know somebody that did.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chuck Tingle is definitely going by his erotica very open to different kinds of experiences in a way that I think a strict religious upbringing would not,
I believe there's one about a dinosaur. I don't know.
Yeah. I was pounded in the butt by the like anthropomorphic personification of a great ass, like stuff like that. So, definitely open to unconventional sexualities. But I do know that Chuck Tingle is autistic, and the main character is autistic, as well as she is a young, autistic, queer teenager in a very strict religious household, and Camp Damascus is a religious conversion camp. So
that sounds terrific. Oh man, why don't we cover horror on this show? No, it's fine.
I mean, we can add horror. Horror would definitely fall under the branch of speculative fiction, so we can add a horror category.
Oh no, that'd be like 1,000. I mean,
well, but not any less than any of the other things that we've talked about. Like, not less sci-fi. You think there's a shortage of sci-fi material out there?
Man.
I mean, I'm down for a horror category if you want to add a horror category.
Yeah, I'm not as versed in horror, but I do enjoy, Stephen King's my favorite writer,
spooky person,
or at least
so
used to be. Yeah. Hell yeah. Okay, let's talk about that next time as well.
What about you? Do you have anything that you've been enjoying that you recommend?
Well, I think I mentioned a Doctor Who book last time, Imaginary Friend. And I listened to the rest of both of those collections. They were the Decades collections. And the one from the 90s was pretty good. But I can't remember exactly what was going on in that one. So I'm going to talk about Gideon the Ninth by, is it Tamsyn Muir? I hated it at first. Like, there's all these fantasy words and like like the main character is all bitter and snipey, and it just, the more you sit with it, the more it like I don't know, worms over you like a skeleton cloak. I don't know. It just like, eventually I got it, what it was doing, and it's like really creepy. There's necromancers. The lady becomes a cavalier, which is like a swords person that's supposed to protect the necromancers. And there's a murder mystery, and yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, I would say give it 50 pages. That's what I usually do if I'm like challenged by a book. I'm like, I'll give it 50, and then I'll know if I can enjoy it or not. And this one, yeah, turned the corner. So that was cool. So that's it for us. Listener, we have an email now. It's greatandsecretknowledge@gmail.com. We don't have any social media yet, but maybe we'll jump on that. Excuse me. Of course, you can listen to my other podcast, Shattered Worlds RPG, or watch me on my bi-weekly stream, Omniversal Escapades with Dean Eaton and what's their real name? Cal's Calzones on Twitter. Az is great. So that show's really fun, and it's funny. It's like a full-on comedy. So that's a lot of fun. We take turns playing different RPGs, and we've done that dad one. What's that called? Into the Dad Zone or something?
The Dadlands?
The Dadlands, that's the one. Yeah, we played several different types of games, so that's a great show. That's every other Sunday at 6:30. Yeah, 6:30 PST. So check that out. Anything you want to give them, links, ways to find you?
My other podcasts are Historical Hotties, where we debate the hottest historical figures in history, everything from opera divas to computer programmers. I also am on the Cool Breeze Over the Mountains, which is a Keanu Reeves filmography podcast, and the Kurt Locker, which is a Kurt Russell filmography podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited. Anytime I watch a Keanu or Kurt movie from now on, I'll know that I can like jump over there and see if our thoughts align.
I am one of a roster of hosts, so I'm not on every episode, but you can always hear an interesting discussion about whatever that movie is. So,
hell yeah.
And if there's a movie you're not sure about whether you should check out or not, you can also watch it to say, like, don't ever watch Knock Knock.
I have heard bad things about Knock Knock.
Yeah, it's bad. Save yourself. If you're interested at all, listen to our podcast episode on Cool Breeze Over the Mountains about Knock Knock, where we wish we could eternal sunshine our brains, and it'll give you an idea of the plot without you actually having to watch it. So
that's great. All right. Well, folks, you did it. You got to the end of this 2-hour episode, and we thank you. Let's give them our goodbye phrase that we say every week.
Oh yes, that catchphrase that we definitely have established and say every time.
I shivered. I'm looking at these quotes. I like them with no very great enthusiasm. Yeah. We'll look over our quotes. We'll find something. The statues will look down on you with blessing. There we go.
There you go.
Let's see you, folks.